Hi, this is exercise 6. In the last exercise, we were looking at the box model and different ways of scaling boxes. In this exercise, we're going to look at positioning those boxes that we've created. So let's go ahead and open up our code editor. And I have the screen split here. I have the HTML code here on the right, and we'll be writing the CSS code over here on the left. And if I bring up my browser, you can see currently I just have some various text written inside of these boxes, which currently have no spacing or margin around them. So we just see the text one on top of the other. And you can see I've already written this HTML code out here. And I've written a comment in the code that illustrates different types of positioning. We're going to look at static positioning, which is the default. We're also going to look at float positioning. And we're going to look at other types of positioning such as relative positioning, absolute positioning, and fixed positioning, as well as z-index property for adding layers so we can have things that are overlapping in front and behind in our web page layouts. So all of this positioning is going to help us learn to move elements around on the screen, build columns and rows, and basically the building blocks of HTML page layouts. To get started, let's go ahead and look at on line 10 here in the static positioning, and you'll notice that inside of that I have a div with a class of container. I've already created and applied these classes. We're just going to have to go over here in the CSS and write the class to target these particular containers. And you can see inside of this this parent container here, I also have these children, which are just boxes. I've given each of these divs a class of box, just sort of as a generic name that we're going to use to style these. So to start off with, let's just add some default styling to my page. Now, if I wanted to remove the margin and the padding, which by default each browser is going to add some margin and padding onto all of our elements, and to do a very basic and simple reset, we can use the universal selector, which is the star symbol, and we can say something like padding 0 and margin 0. Now, some of the older versions of Internet Explorer, some of the older browsers, which may not be an issue for you, but looking back towards older versions of browsers, we may not have full compatibility with the universal symbol. So just to cover all our bases, what we can do is make a compound selector here by using the comma, and we can also just mention HTML, comma, body, which will make sure that the actual HTML page and body itself will not have any margin and padding on it. So this is kind of a basically a simple CSS reset that we can use for this example. And the reason why we call it a reset is it's removing that default browser styling, removing the padding and the margin off all elements there. So in this case, I do have a this parent container here that's called a div that has a class of container. So let's go ahead and create the class for that now. So I'll say .container. And some of the properties I'd like to add to this is I think I'll give it a width. We'll say 800 pixels. And we're also going to give it a background color so it's easy to see. Let's see. And we'll keep this pretty simple. We'll just create a gray color. $CCC, which is the hexadecimal shorthand for gray. And we will add a little bit of margin to here just so we can see a space in between each of those containers. There's actually multiple ones here. And we'll also add a tiny bit of padding inside of it. Excellent. We also have boxes inside of there. The children are actually divs that have a class of box, which you can see indicated here. This guy has a class of box, and so does this one. Now for these boxes, we're just going to give them a width of 100 pixels. And we'll also give them height of 100 pixels, just making them a small square on the screen. And let's give them a background color so they're easy to see. And I'll just go ahead and say aqua for the color there. And additionally, we'll also give them 10 pixels of padding and 10 pixels of margin. And why not give them a border also? We'll just say 1 pixel solid black for our border. Excellent. So inside of these particular boxes here, we can see that we've written inside of it, I'm a box position static. This is the default. I've written that inside each box. So if we don't give any special positioning, if we don't use any properties, which we'll be seeing in future examples here, such as float, if we don't specify any floats or any particular relative, absolute, or fixed positioning, it's just by default going to position it static. So let's take a look at that. And you'll be familiar with this from other examples. So I'm going to save and refresh here in the browser. And all of a sudden I can see that all my examples are just sort of appearing flush left. These guys are displaying block, each of these divs, so they're just appearing flush left. And we can see here, if I make it a little bit wider, you can see that this is 800 pixels wide, this light gray box, which is the parent container. And here this parent container has some text inside. It says, I'm a static parent. And inside of that static parent, we have these boxes which are positioned static by default. And this is perfectly fine. This is what the browser is going to do on its own if we don't specify any positioning. Now let's look at another example where, for example, let's say we wanted to position a box to go to the left, or we wanted to position a box to go all the way to the right. So in other words, if I'm building a website layout and I want to have some type of column structure, or I want to position elements side by side